Welcome to the Hunt Test Hobo Podcast, your place for truckside chats and insights into the retriever game. Whether you're just getting started or you're a seasoned handler, this podcast is another resource for tips, tricks, and insights from both the amateurs and professional trainers' perspectives. Each week, we'll dive into the nitty-gritty of retriever training, sharing stories of success, overcoming challenges, and forging stronger bonds with our dogs. This is the Hunt Test Hobo Podcast. I'm Chris Rudd, your host, fellow retriever enthusiast, and student of the game. Let's dive in. Welcome to the Hunt Test Hobo Podcast and
The Lab.
We're doing a combo podcast today with Barton Ramsey of Southern Oak Kennel, and I'm Chris Rudd with the Hunt Test Hobo Podcast. And today I got to hang out at your awesome facility. It was pretty sweet.
Yeah, I was glad when you said you'd be down, and I know we're going to talk about breeding, but you went to the best, Lee Payne, in the breeding business of Labradors. I was like, hey, that's close by. You should, if you're going to make that far of a drive, you should stick around and get you a free place to stay and hang out.
Beautiful lodge. It was very convenient timing. I mean, we were going to record this podcast on Thursday. Now it's Friday.
Friday, one day.
We didn't miss it by much. I thought it was pretty funny, though. I don't know if I told you this. So there's a gentleman named Lonnie Burns who's, I don't know if you know, he's an American breeder. And I've bought, I think I added it up, 6 dogs from him now.
Yeah, the guy you ran into.
Yeah. So I pull up the Lee Paynes, and I'm like, dude, that's his truck with this white topper. Like, I knew it was him. So I texted
No plan to meet him there.
No plan to meet him there. I texted him, and I said, hey, where are you at? Are you at Dr. Payne's? And he said, nope. And I was like, oh, like, what are the chances of this, like, it's not a normal color truck. It's like beige or something. You know, it's a beige Chevy with a white topper with Hunt Test ribbons on the inside of it. And I was like, well, I walked in, and I gave the dog, to his office, and I didn't see him. And then I drove away, and he texted me back, dude, I was joking. I was here. I was getting So he was getting some hips done for actually a dog that I trained for a little bit when he had some stuff going on. So I had the dog for about 3 to 5 weeks or so. So it was actually a dog that I like so much. I've bought 3 from him now.
Nice.
Of that same breeding repeats of it. So we're going to do an interesting conversation today. We've been talking about doing this ever since like our last conversation. I texted you the next day, and I was like, hey, we need to have a conversation about the difference between American and British labs. And my motivation, and I want you to kind of talk about what your motivation is, but my motivation is to help people be more educated on the different, the main different lines of performance Labradors, so that as they go on their Labrador journey, or in my mind, more importantly, advise their friends on picking the right lab for what they're going to do.
Yeah. Because
I think so often people, I went hunting with that one dog one time, and I wanted to go find another dog just like that dog.
Yep.
And that might be the right route, but it might not be.
I agree with that. I think it's important. For me, the conversation is important on giving some historical context, which we've chatted about some, helping people to think critically about it, because it's easy to be like, well, this is what I know, so this is what I like, and I don't like the other thing. And I think it's much better to have a open mind, educated opinion on both. And really, for me, selfishly, to clarify, I'm not anti anything as far as dogs go. I'm anti mixed breeds, I'm anti silver labs. But
the funny part about that is my daughter, who's 7, is like, when can I get a Labradoodle?
Yeah. And
I was like, dear, you can't. You'll never get one under my house. And I tried to explain to her like bone structure and diseases, and she's like, but they're cute.
Yeah, they're cute, and they're hypoallergenic. They won't shed on your boat. Yeah, I get it all the time. My buddy, who we ran into today, the guy driving the truck with the other boat, he has several golden doodles.
Oh, that's what it is.
Two or 3. Well, they make both. I think at this point the poodles have been put to everything. They're probably tired of it. But no, he and he took one to his vet, and he asked the vet, what do you think about golden doodles? And the vet said, well, up until about 10 years ago, we just called them mutts. And looked him dead in the eye.
Yeah.
And the guy was like, oh, well, okay.
Yeah.
Like that was the stance. I was like, well, I appreciate your vet for being honest. It's a mix. Anyway, I don't want, I like to clarify as much as possible. And for me, as I said in episode 1 of the lab, my goal is to build bridges. I want to build bridges between different thoughts, different philosophies, between different groups of people. I think on our first podcast, there was an immediate bridge because we had lived almost the same life up to that point, which was wild. So that's not hard. But for the listener, anyone listening, whether it's your folks or the lab folks, which are probably different audience, to build a bridge from one to the other so that there's a clearer understanding, not just this, blind, like I said, I choose this, not that. Well, why? I love to get into the why.
Absolutely. And I think that it's important to help the listeners understand that we're going to talk in generalities here. Mm-hmm. All right. I hope that every single one of your dogs is the exception to the rule.
Yeah.
And that you have the greatest dog that hasn't, that's just perfect. Like that's, in the end, I hope everybody's dog is like that. But that might not be the case. And we're going to talk in, statistics in general. But like I said, like that's not meant to offend anybody. That's just meant to educate. This is going to be an educational podcast about both sides of it. And I'll start out by saying the reason that I feel somewhat informed enough to do this podcast is I've probably trained with 10 to, I think I was trying to add it up. I got to 10 confidently of British labs that I have trained with at a reasonably extensive amount, like at least 6 to 7 sessions of training with them. And there's 2 Labradors that are owned by my good friend Bill Chittenden, who's my main training partner. Mm-hmm. I don't know where his labs came from, but they're British. One of them passed the Grand this last year. Exceptional dog. He has a problem that is very an American problem. He has a sticking problem.
That's interesting.
But he has, he's passed the Grand this last year. Hopefully this spring. And then his other young dog, who's 2.5, have made it to the 4 series. And he's running qualifier level watermarks, and he's doing really, really well. So I'm saying all this that I don't own any British dogs. All of mine are, pretty typical Grand field trial stock. But I've been around a ton that have been trained both in I'm just going to call it the Rex Carr method, as well as some that have been trained in, following the Cornerstone program.
Yeah.
Now, I haven't seen a full in-depth of all the training of Cornerstone, but I have a reasonable idea. And if at any point I say something like, no, that's not actually how we do it, just correct me. And I'm trying not to make assumptions. I'm trying to speak with some level of understanding.
Sure. And I think you're right. And I think I want to be careful to not call Cornerstone exclusively British.
Okay.
That's a thing people will say.
That's definitely the way I thought it was.
But I think because if you ever, we're going to dive into it, but if you ever go to Britain and watch dog work, there are a lot of things we do that they don't, from a hunting standpoint. Okay. So there are differences where it's like an Americanized, but the style, when we would say, so we would be probably wise to use words like non-compulsion.
Okay.
Right. I've used that word before. We've talked a little bit about it. So we are a non-compulsion style, which is that's most people in the United Kingdom that train. And I think that the introduction of less compulsion, aka not using force fetch, in the U.S. with Labradors primarily came through people who were working with British dogs.
Yeah.
So I think that's why it gets kind of conflated where people are like, oh, that's the Cornerstone, that's the British dog program. Well, there are a lot of people. I mean, we have people with Boykins, we have people with American Labs, but the style is just a non-compulsion program. But I am fine to use that as far as like no one's training dogs in America. Well, no one should be intentionally training dogs in America for like a British style hunt, right? Yeah. We don't do any of that here, really. So
there's no competitions here, right?
No, there used to be. We can talk about that, but and it's very different over there, and we'll get into it. But Over here, we're primarily doing waterfowl, and even our upland is different. So we're training them for American work, but the methods are less pressure, no force, non-compulsion, and that would be where people call it sort of British.
Yeah.
And I'm fine drawing the line between those two, where you would say, and we'll get into this, hey, most of the dogs who have the titles that make you think, hey, that's an American dog, we're probably trained with a Rexcar based system. And most of the dogs who come from a British heritage or were trained from Cornerstone or Cornerstone members or anything like it, were probably more of a quote, air quote, British style, if that makes sense.
Is it all right for the conversation to say that's the British style and then
Sure.
we'll say American, just so that it makes
as long as we know we're talking about training dogs to hunt here.
Yeah. And so I think there's a couple things like I want to unpack right there. One is everything that we're going to talk about is the goal and the standard that we're measuring. And American field trials, I'm going to use the word field trials because I'll say field trials and hunt tests, and we're going to talk about separating those out at some point in the conversation because I do think that's an important part. But we have that side, and then your primary goal is not competition.
Right.
Your primary goal is a dog that does what it needs to do in the duck blind, does what it needs to do, hunting. I mean, do you guys do upland? Actually, I don't know.
Yeah,
that.
for sure. Yeah. I mean, I would say 75% waterfowl, 25% upland.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're doing it for a different goal than perhaps then you're doing it for a different goal than the standard that Americans are creating their breeding program for. So I want to do two things. I want to unpack the competition side of the British side. Then I'll kind of unpack the American side a little bit, just so that the listeners are clearly hearing the two different sides. And then, let's just start with that.
Yeah, that's good. From the British side, and when we talked about this earlier, I kept trying to shut down our conversation because I was like, wait till we record it. Yeah. But the goal here when we're talking about these dogs is to have a dog with a nice pedigree. What you mean by that is there are titles in that pedigree where you can say, hey, there are some things accomplished here. And for me, in my breeding program, that's going to be things that were likely accomplished in the United Kingdom or in Ireland. And over there, the primary method, the only method to achieve the meaningful title of field trial champion is through field trials. And their system is a little different than ours. It's the type of trial or level of trial you run is based on the dog, not the handler. So the open is not pro handlers, and the amateur is not, it's called a novice, is not novice handlers, it's the dog. So every dog has to start with novice or even a puppy stake. And then you run novice, and when you win a novice, or in Ireland maybe place, have a certain amount of points, then you qualify to run in opens. Then you have what's called an open dog, and the dog is able to run in opens. And then when you win an open, you're an open stake winner. When you win, they have 2-day opens and 1-day opens. If you win 2-day opens or 3 1-day opens, you're now a field trial champion. There are no points in the United Kingdom for second place. It doesn't.
It's a winner or dinner.
Winner or go home. In Ireland, it's more like the AKC in that you have to win one, but you can also have, I think it's 12 or 13 points and make up a field trial champion in Ireland, which would be the south of Ireland. In the Irish Kennel Club. But the rules are the J-regs are very similar. The style of trial over there is most likely upland with some duck shoots. But if you're not familiar with British style shooting, I would recommend listening to the podcast, the lab episode with Laura Hill. We get really deep into it, but the style is a real day's hunt. So the only thing similar in America would be a Springer Spaniel trial where you're really shooting live birds. But you're walking, a lot of walk up. You're shooting live game.
Are they driven? Is that how
you
they're
do
doing
driven
it?
And you do walk up? So driven, you're standing in a line. Walk up, you're rough shooting.
You're actually trying to flush a bird.
Yeah, your dog's at heel, but you're walking in a group of people, and oftentimes there are spaniels flushing in front of you.
Got it.
You're
a retriever at
correct
that point.
At that point. There is no quarter and flush in the British world for retrievers. I would say in the British world they're very breed specific. Like the intention of the breed is what we're going to do.
They have very specific jobs.
Correct. And so a lot of heel work. You're walking at heel. the standards for control at the line are intense. So if your dog, there is no controlled break. If your dog takes 4 or 5 steps out, it's like, thank you for your time, put your lead on, out you go. Usually there are 4 dogs in line at a time, 2 on one side, 2 on the other. There's 2 judges on each side. There's guns all through the line. You're walking, birds are flushing. They shoot rabbits too. And the judge.
Do they retrieve rabbits?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's pretty wild.
Yeah, like, I remember I went upland hunting one time with some distant family members, and I shot a rabbit, and they're like, "Don't let my dog retrieve it," because they don't want them to start to think that that's what they're supposed to find.
Yeah, over in the UK, it's normal, and it's rabies free. If the country is. So, yeah, rabbits. That first time I saw that.
That's interesting. So rabies don't exist over in.
Yeah. So when we bring our dogs over, they don't have to have rabies vaccinations from England because they're rabies free. The continent of Europe is rabies free. So yeah, it's so. A quick story. The first time I was over there watching trials, I was with some friends and I was carrying game. That's a job for someone at a trial. You have a bag. They're handing you birds. Back to the standards, when the dog brings a bird or a rabbit and delivers to hand, they want to see a very clean delivery. Mm-hmm. If the dog is at all sticky, you're out. Period. If they see it,
define sticky as they don't give it.
They don't want to give you the bird. Yeah, they're holding on to it.
Do with chomping or anything like that?
If they chomp or hold it, you got to rip it. If feathers go everywhere, not just from the bird being shot, but obviously the dog's ripping feathers off.
You're done.
See you later.
Yeah.
But I'm holding these. The judges. The handler takes the bird or the hare, usually a bird, pheasant, partridge, which we would call chucker, grouse, mallards, and sometimes rabbits. The judge then is given the bird to evaluate. Every bird is evaluated to see if the dog has a hard mouth. That's a very important, and I'm talking about, I have seen some 20-minute discussions between 2 judges over whether or not the bird was crushed from the shot or the fall or the dog. It's a serious evaluation because that's an eliminating fault if it's hard mouthed. And then
we'll get into the difference. Americans
correct.
Don't necessarily completely care about that.
Yeah,
like we do, but we also have a different way of fixing that.
Yeah, the ducks at the end of a hunt test look a little different than. So
I think that has to do with not enough birds.
Correct. But. I agree. So then they give the birds to a guy like me, the American big dude or the friend or the committee member, and I've got a big sack. Well, I'm holding this sack of game up in this moor in Yorkshire. I've never been there before in my life, and they keep shooting rabbits. And when I say rabbits, these things are like 20 pounds, dude. They're big. Like big rabbits.
Are they releasing them?
No, they're wild.
They're finding them?
They're wild. And
How do you control something like that?
Well, it's different over there.
That's the difference. Is like a hunt test is unbelievably controlled.
Correct. Big difference, actually. So we're running and
a
rabbits.
Field trial is
my wife is up at the top of the hill, and Bethany's there, and she's carrying like maybe 2 braces, which is 2 birds each, of beautiful grouse, like red grouse. They're beautiful, and she's got them 2 on each shoulder on a little thing. I'm at the bottom of the hill with like 7 20-pound rabbits, and I'm dying. And I look at my pants are soaking wet, and my socks are squishy. And I'm like, what is happening here? And my friend Laura, who I was not friends with at the time, just met her. She looks at me, and I was like, what is all over me? And this is on the other podcast, and she said, did you strip the piss? And I was like, what? And she pulls a bunny out of my bag, rubs its stomach up and down, and pee shoots out of it.
You just said urine leaking all over you.
I am literally covered in rabbit urine. So much so that my socks are squishy in my boots.
That's a good day.
Good day. So yeah, every retrieve is different. There is a level of control you have to have. There's a level of luck.
Yeah.
You want someone to shoot a bird that sails out to 150. You don't want it to sail out to 400. You don't want it to fall at 30. Like you're wanting that nice, that's a nice retrieve over the hill, in the thick cover. Some of the key differences that I've seen, and I'm only going to explain how they do it in the UK so that you can then follow up with how they do it here. If you shoot a bird and it falls into a heavy, heavy batch of cover, right, like grass or bracken or whatever, they really want you to get the dog to the downwind side of the cover and give the dog the command to hunt.
And so you can cast them, and that's not a fault.
No, not at all. You can cast on a mark. It's not a fault. They want you to get the dog to the area as quickly as possible. So if the dog overruns the area and you stop it and call it back to the area, not a fault, which is, in my opinion, if I will say most judges, if the retrieve should have been a straightforward mark and the dog doesn't mark well, they will mark you down a little bit.
And you'll be dropped for that.
Or you wouldn't be dropped. You would just probably get a minus, so you're not going to make to the next round, or you're probably not going to win. But if it's not a straightforward mark, or if it's a tough retrieve, that's not the big deal.
There's a lot of judges' opinion in that.
Very subjective in that, yes. And they want to see you get a dog into the area, tell it to hunt, and those judges really want to evaluate how the dog does the work in the area. I mean, it is important. We will talk, I'm sure, about the tail. They want to see tail action. They want to see a dog using the wind to its advantage, using the scent cone, holding an area. So they give that hunt whistle, which I know drives people crazy here. But like when you give it, it's like playing hot cold with your kids. You're like, oh, you're getting hot. You're getting hot. You know, they want to know when I tell my dog you're close, it stays there. It just destroys that area until it finds the bird.
Got it.
Because if it hunts big, it's going to disturb more game.
Which makes sense for hunting, right?
Correct, for hunting.
Yeah.
So delivery, steadiness, when you're on the line, you cannot speak to your dog. I mean, you could probably get away with like heel. But if you're sitting there saying heel, here, I mean, you're out. Yeah. That's done. No noisy handling at all. No threatening anything, which that's probably carries over. You can't yell. Your caster have to be clear. And there are some things that I notice, and I catch a lot of flack from some of my friends in the UK for saying stuff like this, but their whistle stops don't have to be super crisp. They might whistle 2 times, sometimes a third quick whistle just to get the dog to actually really stop, and it's like, hey,
so that's not a priority to them.
No, and they don't want to see the dog just absolutely blowing off the whistle, and if it's a common occurrence, they're probably going to put you out. But like I've seen a lot of dogs over there that won a trial, and it took a few whistles to get them woed up. That said, that's also a lot of dogs I see on a hunt, with a live bird that just got shot. I mean, everything's live flyer, right? So, and there is a ton of game. Like it's in, so the puppy that you met that I have, I watched, we had her mom's litter mate. I was with her mom and the owner, my buddy Simon in England, phenomenal trainer. That dog is very birdy. And I watched that dog go to an area where a bird fell and had run out. He stopped the dog and told to hunt, and she flushed out like 7 or 8 birds.
Holy cow.
Right? So she's going nuts. And he's like,
she has no idea which bird it is at this point.
But these are all live birds. And now he's got to get her out of that area because this bird ran.
And he saw it run?
Yeah, I think he was told by the judges where it was. She actually wouldn't leave the area. She kept hunting and went out. And I love her. She's phenomenal. But like for me, I'm like, that's my style of dog, right? Yeah. But she was like, hey, there's birds here, boss.
So it's very nose reliant.
I mean, we've talked about this briefly. We're going to get into it.
Yeah, I'm just setting that up a little bit.
The judges want to evaluate steadiness. We'll talk about an off switch. I don't mean taking a nap. I mean, can your dog just chill the heck out while shots are going off, right? I mean, there's times where I was at the IGL in 2018 with some friends, and the judges had, this happens a lot, but the judges had to ask the guns, hey, quit shooting. We have like 9 birds down. There's birds everywhere, and there's just shots going off everywhere. And then the guns are like, hey, we got one down over here. They tell the judges tell you, hey, Chris, we got a bird over here. It's right there. It's 120 yards. We'll tell you when you get to the area. Go ahead and send your dog. And so it's crazy. It's hectic. And they want to know, can the dog just sit reliably at heel, or is it going to make noise? If you make noise, you're gone. If they catch your dog even making a whining noise when it yawns, you're out. And then on the flip side of that, let me say this, because I think this is often overlooked. I saw 2 dogs go out of a trial, of 2 different trials last year in the fall, late October, because they walked back.
They weren't stylish.
The judges were like, we need to see a stylish retrieve. Yeah. That's not interesting to us. Like and essentially it was like just a lack of effort, right? And so I don't want you to think these dogs are out here just lollygagging around. They got to go. And the dog that's the most stylish is probably going to win and under control. Yeah. So it's not a laziness. We need the best of both worlds. The only other thing I will add is over there they have this thing called the eye wipe, which I've talked about, which is awesome. It's fun to watch. It's like knockout in basketball. So if I go for a retrieve and the judges know it's there and I don't get it, they're going to call in the next dog behind me. Let's just say it's you. You're dog number 2. They're going to tell you where it is. They're going to give you a chance to hunt the area. You don't find it. They're going to usually call in 4 dogs. If the fourth dog doesn't find it, the judges are going to go look. If the judges find it, you're all 4 out.
Wow.
If any dog finds it behind another dog, the previous dogs are out. If the first dog saw it as a mark and was sent for it and didn't find it, that one's probably out anyway. It's called first dog down. And what that means is, hey, your dog actually had the best chance. You should have retrieved that bird. The other dogs weren't using it as a mark. But the dog was a runner, so your dog should have got to the area, followed the scent, found the bird, brought it back. Very difficult. I have seen some unbelievable dogs go out as first dog down, and you're like, well, shoot, that dog had a lot of life. Like it hit the ground running, right? And so that's, again, goes back to luck. But it's pretty cool because you have this opportunity in a British trial to gain, a good way to describe it would be extra credit. You're like, all right, well, I have all A's. My retrieves are all good, but I retrieved this one when 2 other dogs couldn't. I put them out. Now I got extra credit.
Yeah.
Right. Or a really, really long, tough retrieve, and the dog did well. They're going to give you a little, like an A+.
Okay.
And so, yeah. And at the end of the day, the judges are going to say, hey, which dog is the best dog on the day? And then they're going to award that dog first place. They're going to do first through fourth, and then certificates of merit. Any dog that finished the trial is usually going to get a certificate of merit, which is valuable. You know?
I mean, that's somewhat similar to like a derby, but
correct.
And as you get higher up, the opens, it's not that way. But
right.
Okay, so and the other thing I want to point out while you're doing this is that how much water is involved?
Less than 20%.
Okay, less than 20%, which is going to become a big part of our conversation later.
A lot of creeks, rivers that are flowing very fast. Ponds that are not super big.
Not big. Like, how often do you see a big swim?
I have never seen a dog in a British. Well, at the IGL in 2018, the last retrieve of the day is the last retrieve of the national championship is always a water retrieve, no matter what.
How far distance are you thinking?
That one is probably the furthest I have seen, and it was across a pond, and most of the pheasants were on the other side. The dog that won it is Billy Steele Jr.'s dog. He had to cross the pond, and where he crossed, I would guess it was a 110-yard swim.
Okay.
That's the furthest I've ever seen in a British trial. I'm not saying there aren't further. I've seen a lot of 20-yard to 30-yard swims across a lot of current, and then you have to handle up a big hill on the other side. Like, there's a lot of times where you're at a shoot where you're kind of at a river.
And so you'll handle that.
Correct. Yeah, it would not be. Most dogs would not be expected to cross that.
It's not important to go straight and find a bird. Now, get that there's current. I understand.
Right.
That. I'm just
it's also really not frowned upon to cheat the water. I mean,
and I think that's important for everybody.
For sure.
So let's talk about cheating for 1 second. So cheating is not going directly to a bird. It's running a bank or whatever. And running a bank is probably the best example. And the problem is we're talking about 110-yard mark. All right, the dog might find that bird. All right, but when you're talking about 300 to 400 yards that we're throwing at field trials, if they don't go straight, they will inevitably get lost.
For sure. They're going to overcorrect their...
And when we talk about the differences in training, we're going to talk a lot about the mental stability of water and complexity of route that I think is going to be a major differentiator between British and American standards.
Yes.
Probably the best way to say that.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I think when people in the UK see us running drills in, like, even my tech pond,
which is a super nice tech pond, by the way.
Thank
I would
you.
like, if I could like train puppies in here, man, I'd be like the puppy king.
It's small, but it's like, hey, you can accomplish a bunch with a youngster right here.
Oh,
I built it really, honestly, with my friend Wally in mind, because he comes here in February with all these young dogs.
Yeah.
And he has February to April before they go back to Michigan. And I'm like, what can I build that Wally can leave with a bunch of dogs that are pretty prime for success?
Yeah.
But when we post videos of that, you can tell the guys from the UK are like, what are you doing? Like, that's the longest way possible to get that bird.
The longest way possible.
Yeah, it's like, that took forever. You know, it could just gone around, pick it up, and come right back. So when we import them, we de-cheat a bunch of them. We really do. And some of them are really easy, like Moose out there. He was like, Laura had him going pretty straight, but he tried to cheat. I stopped him. I was like, I cast him. And he's like, oh, okay, I'll get in. Some of them are like, no, dude. Like Arden, my buddy Corey's dog. That dog's in the 500 point club in HRC. even at like his prime running hunt test when he's 6.5 years old, if you let him, he's cheating.
And that was a dog that was imported?
Imported as a field trial winner. So
he was very successful in the British game.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I'll do the hunt test / field trial game, and I'm gonna do I think I should do the hunt test game with caveats of the field trial game, only because I think it separates a little more. Because in an American field trial, you are picking a winner. You're picking a few placements and jams.
Right.
So a hunt test, I think the major difference is we are trying to establish a standard of what we want a dog to do for a breeding program. If you read the HRC, that's what this is about. It's about finding the dogs that people want to hunt over, and then obviously breed those dogs because we want to repeat that success. So a hunt test normally, and I'll just use HRC because that's what I'm more familiar with, and I think it'll play over fine with the AKC side. Well, it's a land and water setup. You do land in the morning, water at night or in the afternoon, or vice versa. It doesn't matter what you do. You're going to, I'll just use finished. You're going to have 3 marks that we are judging the dog's ability to find a bird with its eyes and then switch into hunt mode, which I think is a fundamental difference. If you've ever, I've seen on YouTube a few British hunts, and those dogs' nose kick in much earlier than we would like
on
in
the
our
marks
game.
And the blinds.
Yeah, on the marks and the blinds.
Yeah.
And then we have a control portion of our test where we are running a blind retrieve, where the dog doesn't know where it is, and we are trying to get them specifically to an area without hunting. And I think that's a major difference. And I think that we talked about this in our first podcast, but this is something that it's not that I disagree with the HRC standard, because I think that to have a pass-fail system, you have to have a standard. And I said this, and I still think it's accurate. If I can put a dog within 5 foot of that, bush or that ribbon that's there, I can help a dog find a bird when it's hunting. And but with that said, is that you are judging control in that portion of a hunt test. And if you're doing a field trial, you typically, marks and blinds are separated, where your first series is, a triple, double, or quad of a land series, where the dog has to pick up all those marks without being handled, which I think is a major difference between the two games. And then you run your control portion where you're running blinds. And the blinds in a field trial or an SRS, which is a combination of hunt test and field trial, could be 350 to 400 yards, which is vastly different than what we're talking about. And there's a common thing that's said, and I think this is kind of the major differentiator between a hunting dog or a British trained dog and an American dog that's trained to the highest level, which I would say is a field trial, is that they have to go 350 yards, 400 yards to a destination that they don't know, completely reliant on you to cast them and not have any cast refusal. It takes a different level of mental stability and courage to trust somebody to say, hey, you're going to go out there and you're going to find a bird.
Yeah.
And this is not, I hear all the time, like, hey, my dog retrieved a snow goose that went 350 yards.
In a bean field.
I'm like, okay, yes, congratulations. Your dog did something really cool. And I'm sure everybody...
Your friends love to see it.
Man,
yeah,
and I was probably be one of those that was jacked up because it's super cool.
Yeah, it's fun.
But it's different when you have 17, maybe that's too much. Let's just say 5 decision points that the dog has to make en route to that mark or blind that they're doing to do it right, to go straight.
Yeah.
So that they find a hen pheasant that was thrown by a guy in a white coat, so they knew to look out that far. Because that's the thing that people don't realize. The reason that field trialers use white coats is because we want to see the standard of a dog going really far and then actually identify where that bird came from and landed when it's a 30-foot
Sure.
arc versus a snow goose that you shot
Yeah.
and sailed 300 yards. There's a major difference there. So we're trying to simulate that distance. And that bird falls, and they pick up 3 other marks before that mark at varying distances. I'm just using an open field trial here. Let's say there's one at 150, one at 250, and one at 300, and 2 of those retired, plus your 4th bird retired, which means it was a guy in a white coat, and then he goes and hides in an A-frame.
Yeah.
And is brushed in. The dog has to look out and be like,
Where was that again?
I remember that hen pheasant was 2 feet to the left of that point, and I'm going to do some calculations here.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to swim, and I'm going to go through 4 to 5 re-entries. And that bird actually landed on an island that the guy threw to that point. You know, that takes a different level of courage and mental understanding than a complete hunting scenario.
Sure.
So that, I think, is something that's fundamentally different between the two things. And I'm going to back up. So we're talking about standards. What we just outlined are 2 different standards that we're judging the success of a breeding against.
Correct.
The British method is probably way more organic and way more accurate to what we would call a land setup.
Sure.
Versus what we're trying to measure is the dog's ability to reason on its way to a mark.
Yeah.
And because of that difficulty, we make some compromises, I would say, in other parts of our game.
Yeah.
Which I know the British folks would say, I'm just using that as the term, would say that's not what they want, like noise, creeping, moving, which is interesting because the Hunt Test game, like the Grand, doesn't put up with any of that.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of nuance between America. It's a lot bigger. And it's worth noting right here, if we go to England and we found every person who's going to be involved in Labrador Retriever field trials in England and Ireland and Scotland and Wales, and we put them all in a at a meeting together, that many people will be at most weekend HRC tests.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah, without a doubt. Yeah. Sorry, my Google is going off over there. So
it's not that many.
No. When you talk about how many people are at the Grand,
yeah, it's 900 dogs.
So it's significantly more people than are involved in the entire community in England, Ireland, Scotland. Without a doubt.
I had no idea that was that different.
Without a doubt. I mean, over there, I'm guessing here. I'm educated. I've been there. You were talking about seeing some British dogs run. And my British experience is decently extensive. I've been over there most years except for the COVID years, and I've seen, I would guess, close to 100 field trials. I would say it's less than 500 people. The whole kit and caboodle. Maybe less than 250.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard for me to tell. I would say less than 250 people, but I could be wrong in that. There could be some outliers. So you're talking about a very small community. And yes, I mean, over there is definitely more of a land series for sure. And one way I've heard it described, which I think is accurate, is they're looking for the absolute best dog on a day's hunt, right? And an American field trial is looking for the absolute best dog on an exceptional retrieve.
Many exceptional.
Many of them.
Yeah.
So they're like, hey, if you go hunting, which dog would you really want out of this group? And an AKC field trial is like, hey, if we went hunting and we had some really bad shooters, and like the dog's got to make some insane retrieves, which dog's the best at it?
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Well, and I'd say that back in the day, if you talk like the Mark Driscoll days, who founded HRC, I'm not that old, but I've heard stories of people saying what we're doing at Hunt Test is what the field trialers were doing back in the day. Mm-hmm. And the reality is that our breeding program has been successful to what we're trying to accomplish.
Yes.
And we've created these insanely intelligent and insanely talented dogs that can go and do this completely, in my opinion, not related to hunting experience anymore.
Sure.
Like
Yeah.
the field trial game, like, yes, you can take I mean, I know a lot of the field trialers that still take their dog hunting.
Right.
But they're learning to hunt just like, your dogs that you guys all train here, dogs that, my friends that are pros, my personal dogs, like all that hunt test and all that training does is prepare them to go learn to hunt.
Sure. Yeah. It's very different.
But my point was, is that these field trials are insane at this point. Like,
Sure.
they're unbelievable what they're
The progression is unreal. And I would say that's a key difference between, that's a cultural difference. Here, it's like, let's just keep pushing.
Yeah.
Let's keep pushing. In the United Kingdom, it's like, hey, there is a ton of emphasis on tradition. Mm-hmm. What has always been the standard, and we're going to stick with it. And I can appreciate both for sure, but I think that's a key difference in why the two. I bet if we went to the 1930s and 40s, we would find that they were very similar. And I think a key difference in why the two have split and the chasm is so wide is because the American cultural tendency is bigger is better. Let's keep going further. Let's keep pushing it. And the British culture tendency is tradition, tradition, tradition. This is what is acceptable for a Labrador Retriever. This is where we evaluate. And they're very, very, very reluctant to change.
Mm-hmm. And so let's talk about a little bit here, your difference in training versus my type of training.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I want people to keep thinking about the different standards that we have been measuring these dogs on. Mm-hmm. We've been measuring American dogs on a certain level of courage, a certain level of trainability to be able to do these insane marking concepts. And then on the other side, a very instinctual, is that the right way to say it? Mm-hmm. Instinctual characteristics and traits of a dog that you have been selectively breeding for.
Yeah. Very like, what's the natural state of this dog? What's its natural ability? In fact, that's language they use. Natural game finding ability. Mm-hmm. That's a big, big part of evaluation over there. Back to your question. Just as far as the training goes, we can dive in wherever as far as getting there.
Yeah, so let's do yours because your guys' style. And what do you think we should pick? I think it would be a good one to pick kind of like what we would call from... I don't know if I even want to say force fetch. I want to say force to pile to handling.
Okay.
I think if we start there, because I think that there's a common misconception that American compulsion training is all about force fetch. And I don't think that's actually the case. I think force to pile is more important. And I'll talk about that a little bit during my part of this.
Yeah. So for our side, that's going to rely heavily on the memory retrieve. So what
do you define a memory retrieve as?
A walkout memory. So obviously we know a marked retrieve, and you've mentioned doubles, triples, quads. These are retrieves the dog saw fly through the air, land in an area. The dog's job is to go make the area, hunt the bird out. That's the same in both countries, although the way we evaluate is probably different. For British dogs, then it's teaching them, hey, you do have to run some blind retrieves. We're going to use the dog's natural desire to build momentum for going out on a straight line. We do that through memory. So you walk out, you throw a dummy on short grass, you tell the dog to heel, you walk back 25 steps, you turn around, the dog sees this big white dummy sitting on short grass, you say, good. You run through all of your cues that you're going to do on a blind retrieve, and you send the dog. And the dog goes and gets it, right? It's not a mark, although it did see it fall, but we're no longer in the same spot where it saw it fall.
Are you using a different word to say go?
Correct, yes.
What do you guys use?
We use go back.
Go back.
Yeah.
Okay. We just shortened it because we're Americans.
Back, yeah, and we use the wrong hand. And a lot of times we use the dog's name too, and the momentum building is there in the name. Okay. So
I can see that.
Yeah. Instead of like Rio is a great example. I'm looking at his picture right now. It's Rio on a mark. It's Rio go back on a blind. And the Rio gets him going. But like I want him to know through all the cues, we're still working on we're on a teamwork exercise.
And while we're doing that, so Americans would say marks are their dog's name typically. I'd say 95% of the time. And then just the cue, dead bird, and then the word back means go. So the cue is dead bird means you did not see this bird.
Yeah.
You're going to go find a bird that you don't know where it is.
Yeah. Yeah. And the cue is important for both. I think it's like, hey, we're playing a different game here. We're not just running out and finding something. We're playing teamwork. So those memories very quickly with a puppy go from 20 feet to 200 yards. Like, hey, we threw it way over there. We've walked all the way across this whole field. I'm going to send you all the way back where we started. Right. And they learn, go.
Are you using any identifiers?
No. And at that point, no.
Okay.
I do use them, and Cornerstone uses them after we go through walking memories. We use.
So you're building the no, I shouldn't say compulsion. You're building the go in the dog to say, hey, you saw something out there, go get it. Which actually, I think from what I've seen, like I don't do it that way, but I think from what I've seen with like I mean, there's a couple of drills that people used to do back in the day, and it was very similar to that.
Yeah. So we're doing these memories, and then I will start with a pile memory, and then I'll start using white posts. And then you're
so when you actually put multiple bumpers at a location,
yes, it's going to be a memory though. I'm going to walk them out and throw it. I'm going to walk them back away from it, and I'm going to send them, and they're going to realize, hey, there's more than one here, and I'm going to walk as they're on their way back to me. I'm going to be walking backwards, and then it's going to be further and further and further.
The same way we would do it, we would have compulsion in there, but
yes,
keep going.
Very similar, and I'm just building on the momentum. And if I see the momentum start to fall, I'm going to take 2 steps backwards, and we're going to continue to confidently work on whatever we were working on, and then build it back up. And then we're going to figure out ways to increase the difficulty of these memories. So circle memories, for instance, or 180 memories.
You just spin the dog?
Well, no. What I would do is like, all right, let's say you're working on sending through water. Walk to one side of a pond, throw a dummy. You and the dog are going to heel and cheat the bank. And then I'm going to line the dog up and send the dog straight through the pond.
And no identifier.
No identifier. Right at that point, it's like, hey, or I just do it in a straight field. I throw the dummy on a tree line. I walk a semicircle or a half circle around to a point, and I send the dog back to where I threw the dummy. And then I'll still use like a 3-legged pattern blind as memories. I teach it as a memory, and then I build the momentum. I'm not using compulsion to send them to it, but I definitely will still do very much like Clark does. I'll build the momentum on the pattern blinds.
And by this stage, we're only using compulsion if necessary.
Correct. At that point, it's rare, right?
Yeah.
So,
and we'll talk about this more. So if people are wondering what compulsion is, just be patient.
Hang on, we'll get there. But for us, it's like, hey, we've built this momentum. We've taught the dog, hey, when I line you up, you know it's out there. You know, go. And I've done enough. It's a lot of repetition, and I'm very quick to say this method takes longer. You are not taking a shortcut using this method. To build a dog who confidently takes a straight line out without force to pile takes longer. And so the deal here is repetition to where the momentum is just being built upon. We're trying our best to set the dog up for success so that the dog just learns, hey, when he does this whole deal where he's like, hey, dead bird, good, all right, that's the way. And he drops his hand and he says, go back. I can go really straight and I'll find it. Like we're doing that all through. Which
is no different than what we're trying to do at this point.
Correct. Once you get to pattern blinds, yes. So we just start it that way. So go ahead and go with.
So I don't want to get into critiques too much. So you can ask me not to. No, you can choose not to answer this question yet. But what do you do if the dog doesn't want to go?
We don't see that a bunch. Okay. And with my dogs, it's rare. That's a super common question is how do you fix no-goes? I simplify. Typically for me, a no-go is going to be confusion.
So you throw one to the pile or do whatever you need to do.
Shorten it, go back.
All right. So
whereas it can not be, and we're not talking about, you earlier you talked about dogs having some grit. You know, I don't think you used the word grit, but in a field trial,
courage.
Courage, yeah. Courage. When you walk up to the line at the water blind at a field trial, and I'm very familiar with what that is, dude, for a dog to look out and realize I'm about to have to swim that, it's a beast, right? And so,
so for people maybe on your side of the, your listeners, like imagine walking up to something that's 300 yards of swimming. Like I remember I ran 120-yard blind one time when we were goose hunting that we sailed the goose to the other side.
And it's insane.
And I was just like, okay, no problem. I walked up and I said, all right, dead bird. My friends who hadn't seen me training, like, were like,
Do we need to get the boat?
Are you going to send the dog for that? And I was like, yeah. And I whistled it, and they were like, I didn't think a dog could do that.
Yeah.
You know, so we're talking about, like, there is an immense amount of courage. And I think, honestly, we're talking about something that I think fundamentally makes a difference. And I think it's going to get to there. But did you want to say anything else?
No, I mean, it's all a momentum building journey, right? Memories to pile memories to increasing difficulty. And then I add in the circle memories. I add in factors. And the confidence is I know where I'm supposed to go. The deal with memories is I've taught you the area.
But just to be clear, the distances we're talking about, are you ever going over 150 yards?
Very rarely.
Okay.
150 would probably be very, very much like my goal.
And you wouldn't sit there long.
No.
Okay.
And like when we get to 150, I'm like, all right, cool, you got it. We'll go to the next thing.
Okay.
Right. And like if it's a 200-yard memory, it's because we try to make a cool video. Or like it's an easy field, or it's like, hey, I really want to teach you down a hill and back up a hill, and it's going to be a long way.
Yeah.
And that's common.
And so I want to interject with here for 1 second. I can count on one hand the amount of times that I had to run a complex water blind that would warrant the training and the skills that I practice almost probably twice a week.
Sure.
With my dogs right now.
Yeah.
On one hand. Now,
yeah, I can count a few of them.
300 yards. I've done a ton of 300 yards in cut corn or beans for a sailed goose. Like I've done a ton of that.
Yeah.
But that's not the mental fortitude that I'm going to be talking about later.
Yeah, for sure. I can think of a few. I can think of a few times where I'm like, oh boy, I wish I had a dog that could do that, because we had to go across, like don't get out there, keep going, keep swimming.
Yeah, swim past this point, swim past whatever this is.
And it's rare. And to be honest, like totally frank, in those situations, I wasn't 100% sure where the bird was either.
Yeah,
it's like,
of course.
Oh, shoot, that's too far. I don't know. But
and what you're talking about, I'm going to talk about it kind of at the end. But like if you're talking about a hunting dog, you don't need them to do that.
Right.
And
rarely.
that's why I think the standard of a hunting retriever champion, I think, is 100-yard blind and 150-yard mark.
I'm glad you clarified that, because we went kind of through hunt tests and you went to field trials, which I appreciate, because that is, I think, the true comparison, right?
And the reason that I'm doing that is because the training methods that most people that are successful in hunt test are doing field trial training practices developed by Rex Carr, Mike Lardy, Judy Aycock, all those really successful field trial people that we just adapted to shorter distances.
Sure, that's all it is. Which we can get into it a little bit if you want. I'm sure we will, but I would say you don't have to have those methods to be successful by and large. I don't want to say 100% pass completion rate, but successful to earn an HRCH title. You don't have to use those methods to earn that title.
And I've seen it. You know, there's two people in Wisconsin that I know of that have done very, very, very well. No collar, no compulsion training, that have had 1,000, 1,500 points.
Yeah. Very doable.
It's very doable. And if that's your goal, fantastic.
Sure.
And I think that honestly, this conversation is going to end with whatever your goal is, do that.
Yeah, and like we're pumped about it.
Yeah.
That's my thing. It's like, hey, whatever your goal is, we're not sitting over here like, oh, you shouldn't have that goal.
Yeah.
You should just be smart about what dog you get for that goal.
And I hope at the end of this, people respect each other's goals, and then they respect each other's training methods, they respect each other's breeding programs. So that's my goal at the end of this. But let's back up to, okay, so we did your kind of blind retrieve building, process, but we didn't get into T, which I would love to talk about, but I think we're already at almost an hour here. So I'm going
50 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to try to keep this conversation expedited as much as possible, because we went 2 hours last time, and
hey, I'm here for it.
I know you
I don't
are.
have to drive back to Chicago tomorrow.
Yeah, I do. All right. So our method is almost identical, except we add another layer of what I'm going to call compulsion. And force fetch becomes the thing that everybody talks about, because back in the day, people would do this in a different way than I do it, and it was not received well.
Right.
I'll just say that.
Sure.
It's become a bad word. So you coined compulsion, or somebody coined compulsion. I'm going to use the word automatic pressure, to mean the same thing as compulsion training. And I want to be clear that everything that we're talking about, the dog already knows. The dog already clearly understands what we're asking them. We don't, and for the folks that are listening that maybe don't know what force fetch is, I'll use this just because this is the hot topic. You lightly put pressure on the ear. I don't use a shotgun shell. I know some people used to do that back in the day. I just grab the soft part of their ear.
You don't use needle nose pliers?
No. Okay. Man, I can't believe that was ever. I don't even know how you ergonomically do that.
Yeah, when I got into this, that was a suggestion.
Are you kidding?
12 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So we've come a long way. I'll just say that.
So lightly using your finger.
Lightly using your
hands.
finger or your hand, or some people do toe hitch.
Yeah.
A very successful. I think Durance does toe hitch. Probably one of the most accomplished hunt test SRS guys out there uses toe hitch. All you're doing is you're making something uncomfortable for the dog, and then you're showing them the way out. Mm-hmm. That's it. That's all it is. So you pinch the ear, the dog opens its mouth because you've already taught them the word fetch means put something in your mouth by using treats or whatever. They already know the command. You apply pressure. You don't reveal the object, which I think is very misunderstood, is that the right way to do force fetch, the way I've been taught it, and which makes sense, is that you apply the pressure. The dog doesn't know how to escape the pressure. You reveal the escape to the pressure, and you say the word. So
I like that distinction. That's very important.
Because
it makes a lot of sense to me.
Because what happens is people think they already know the command. Because when we train puppies, we wave the thing in front of them. We say, come on, fetch. And when they take it, good fetch. And we praise them. We take it
just
out.
Like
we
us.
Treat. I mean, honestly, it's exactly the same way you do it. That's, in my mind, the proper way.
And if you have the object out, I'm just guessing because I want to interject and see if I'm right, because this is fascinating to me. If you have the object out, then they might already be reaching for it. And then you apply the pressure and they think they're being punished for doing what you've taught them to do.
Potentially, yes. But, but hiding the thing makes it very apparent. This is what you're supposed to do.
Super clear.
Super clear. Grab this. And you just do that a few times and they understand to take it up. And the important thing is, in my program that Dan Erkey taught me, is that is not the first time that they've experienced compulsion. In my program, Chris Rudd's program, which is basically Dan's program, there's 2 other instances where they've already received compulsion training or automatic pressure. And actually it's through a lot of different things, but the 2 examples is, one is when I do place training. I treat place training just like I would teach force fetch eventually, where I teach them by getting on a board with treats exactly the same way you do, then overlaying the command of, hey, you get on this place board, you get a treat. 2, once they're collar conditioned, very familiar with the collar, maybe 2 weeks to 3 weeks of collar conditioning. When I say place, I sandwich the command with a nick. Place, nick, place. So they're getting automatic pressure. So they're like, oh, I have to get on this board. The faster I get on this board, I might avoid this pressure. So they're turning off that other pressure. But that's the second time they've learned it. The first time they've learned it is with getting in a crate. So I've taught them their food is in that crate. They've gotten treats to get into that crate. They understand that getting in that crate is a great thing. It's a fantastic thing. I make the crate slightly more difficult to get into. I elevate it slightly. That can be, if you have a lifted truck, this don't work, okay? But if you have a lower truck or an SUV, you put the crate in that. You grab their collar, and then you grab the ruff of their back, and you lift them up to help them realize that they can get into this crate. So they know what you're saying. You're saying kennel. They've been in a kennel 100 times now.
And you're wanting them to like explode into it. Like I want the boom.
I want to beat the pressure and get into this crate.
Yeah.
So the way you do that is you don't make a big deal of it. Every time you go train, you got to drive your dog somewhere. You grab the collar, you grab the back of their butt, and it feels like weird. Why are you doing that? But you're really just doing it to help the dog get in.
Sure. So they're using that. Yeah.
They're getting the pressure.
Yeah.
Compulsion pressure, automatic pressure, get into the crate, kennel. Then they jump in. And eventually, you will go to grab the dog. And before you grab them, they're in the crate.
Yeah.
And that's when you know that you've helped them understand how compulsion training is going to be for the rest of their life.
Yeah.
And I think that is an important thing that people don't realize, is that is normally the first time that they've understood, I have to beat something to escape something. And then you layer that with place, which is the exact same thing as force fetch. And here's the fundamental difference. You're building everything on momentum of I want to get the retrieve. I want to find the bird. That's ultimately what that dog is doing for you.
Yeah.
Is that fair to say?
I think so.
For us, that is not the case.
Right.
We don't care if they want it anymore. Because, and this is important, there is going to be a point in that dog's life in training where we're trying to teach them something that is incredibly complicated. Mm-hmm. And you're going to get 90% there. And the dog is going to be like, dude, I don't know what to do with my hands. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I don't want to get off this point, which a very hard thing for a dog to do is to swim a long time and get back in the water and swim another 50 yards to get in there. And we want to, as best as we can, to make it obvious what the dog's supposed to do. Big white pole with a bucket out there. But there's times where they're like, either A, I don't want to swim that far, or honestly, actually, that's a better example. Most of the time, it's I don't want to swim that far. I know you were casting me angle back to the left. I don't want to go there, though.
The wind is a little shouldering.
Whatever, the
shoreline's appealing.
Man, it looks so much appealing to take that short. And that dog is 150 yards away.
Yeah.
So what we're doing with force fetch and compulsion is we're building in the response that when I cast you, you have to go, dude.
Yeah, you gotta
I don't care which way.
To it,
I don't care which way you're gonna go. Now, I think don't beat me to it on the cast is a bad example because we want them to take a cast.
I don't mean auto cast. I mean like, hey, the momentum is, I'm going, buddy. I'm out.
There's no choice. They've programmed their brain to when I see that cast or I hear that word back, I have to go.
Yeah, I don't mean beat me to the cast. I mean beat me to the pressure.
Beat me to the pressure.
Going. Yeah.
Oh, you gave me a cast refusal, recall, nick, pressure, like light nick, and then you cast. And if they take the cast, there's no more pressure. Like they're beating the pressure.
Right.
Because what happens is they finally take it and they get the bumper. They said, that wasn't so bad. Why didn't I just do that in the first place? But if they don't get that success, you can get stuck there.
Yeah.
And I think that is the fundamental difference and I'm using complex water blends because we'll talk about fundamental differences in the breedings. But I was talking to Lyle a couple weeks ago, and he said the dog that we're looking for is the dog that can do an all age water blind. Because in our game, that is a very hard thing to do.
It's the creme de la creme of like the evaluation. Well, that's why they keep it at the end of the field trials, right?
Yeah.
It's like,
because it takes forever.
Time. Yeah. Time forever. But also like, hey, look, we've seen you can do the rest. Let's do the big. And look, I have a puppy who belongs to Bill Billups. I've mentioned him in Kippy's podcast. He's with George Moody. She is going to run hopefully some quals this fall. We'll see how it goes. And the whole conversation from the beginning is we'll just see where she is when we get to the water blinds.
Yep.
It's like, hey, we've done all the rest. I mean, they've gotten there. And then Bill had to pull her home for a few weeks to build some momentum and get her back going, and then took her back. And he's pleased with where she is. I haven't heard Bill call me. We're about a month out, but it's like the whole deal is, hey, when we get to this, we'll see what you're made of.
Yeah.
Right. What's the deal?
And let me finish, but I want to go back to this point because I want to talk about my friend Bill's dog and what we're doing with him and how we're changing the training based on where he's from. But I want to go back to, I mentioned force fetch as an example of how you hide the bumper, you pinch the ear, you reveal the way out, they get that. But I think more importantly is force to pile. So like you described, we have a pile with a bunch of bumpers there. We're teaching the dog to go to it no matter what. And we're teaching them they have to go, they have to stop, and then they have to take a cast. Okay, I think those are the three. Honestly, guys, for my American folks that are listening to me and be like, you forgot about this. I probably did, okay? But realistically, we have to be able to make them go. And that's go from your side, go en route, and go from a cast. Mm-hmm. Okay? So we have ways to do this. And actually, I just had a phone call from somebody. I don't know if he did Cornerstone or if he did another program, but he listens to the podcast and he called me. He said, my dog's no-going me. I said, well, what's your tool for that? He said, what do you mean? I said, well, what's your tool? Like the thing that I like about the American-style Rex car training method is that we have a tool for everything.
Yeah.
Quote unquote, right? And it's not just repeat it, which I believe is your guys' primary tool.
A lot of attrition.
Attrition means you make the dog keep doing it until they do it right. They realize, oh, I got success. And that's a fundamental way to train a dog. Like we all use attrition. You guys just use attrition more than we do.
Simplification too.
Yeah. 100% simplification, meaning make the task easier for the dog to get success. Because no matter what training method you're doing, the collar or the long lead doesn't do anything if you can't help the dog get success.
Right.
So I'll just say that right now. So going back to force to pile, is that, well, his dog didn't have the tool on how to go. All of a sudden it stopped no going because and actually I don't think this was a lab. That's right. It was a Boykin. And he had labs the whole time, which had enough drive, and he never had this problem. But I've had problems with a dog that was bred from an NFC fox, grand breeding, was a monster dog. And when I started teaching him complex down the shore cast, which is the hardest cast in the American or any dog training system, is a cast. If you're going down the shore, like the dog is slightly to the left, is stopping the dog and giving a right hand straight back, and the dog staying in the water and not getting out.
Yeah, so your cast is actually, your hand is actually the same hand that would put them on the shore.
Exactly.
But the cast is down the shore.
The cast is down the shore.
In the competition, if you gave them a left hand, you'd be being dishonest. Like, that's not the cast.
Well, it's honestly, it's more impressive and it's a better cast. It's actually
it's the true cast.
It's the true cast. And I'll never forget. And so I developed a cue. I learned this from Durance. He had his great podcast, or it's not even a podcast. It's like just him and Jake Latondras talking about how to do water blinds right. And when I understood, I train the dog. When I use the word back with a cast towards the shore, my dogs now know, because I had developed a drill based off of his way of doing it, his system, that the dog knows, if I hear the word back, that means I have to stay in the water. And I've trained the dogs to do that. That's a very hard part, and honestly, this is where the separation between a typical British lab, guys. I'm using quotes here for those that are just listening. The statistical standard. This is where they struggle.
Yeah, for sure.
Because they're like, wait, you're casting me to the shore, but I'm supposed to stay in the water. That doesn't make any sense to me.
Right.
And he started to no-go me at this point because he's like, dude, I don't know what to do with my hands. I was like, just trust me. Mm-hmm. And so every time that he no-goed me, I just heel nicked, which is our correction that we teach. This is my point. We teach that in force to pile.
Yeah.
Force to pile is not about anything more than building those tools. You have to go when I say go. You have to stop when I say stop. And you have to go when I give you a cast.
Yeah, and I think that's a misconception that a lot of the British folk in America have about force fetch and force to pile, is that you see it in the comments, right? Mm-hmm. Well, I have to force my dog to pick it up. They already pick it up. I don't have to force my dog to go.
There's going to be a point where they don't.
Right, that's right. And I'm saying this as a guy who doesn't do it, right? I train using natural momentum. I have the luxury of training dogs only from my breeding program. I know what I'm working with, and I have the luxury of not working toward the same goals you're talking about. We're not going and running a 400-yard water blind, like ever. So it's very different for me in what the goals are, which I know we want to get to. But yeah, when I see those comments from folks and they're like, well, I have to force my dog, they already pick it up. I'm like, you're missing the whole point. The point is not that. The point is when you don't want to, when you don't want to go, these people need a tool to make sure I have to go. Yeah. I can't not go.
And you can do that with automatic pressure by, for example, like when I first start to teach a dog force fetch, the first couple of days of it, I'm just loading the pile. I just keep throwing a bumper. They think it's a mark. With every 2 to 3 are like a quote unquote blind retrieve because they don't know what that means yet. This is the first time they're ever hearing the word back at this point.
Right.
So like with Fang, I'm just throwing them and making them word. Well, at some point, he's got to learn.
Right.
At some point, he's got to learn this. So what did I do? I started backing, and he's like, I'm already going for it. It's not a big deal. I'm just doing it. I'm getting some pressure. I don't quite understand what it is. The problem is that a lot of American trainers that are amateurs don't realize that that's not the point of force fetch. The point of force fetch is not just to apply automatic pressure. The point of, force to pile. The point is to do it until the dog shows you that it is done doing it. Mm. And that comes at different times for different dogs.
Sure.
I'll never forget this great dog that I'm actually still trying to sell at the recording of this podcast. He was like, I love it. And then he went, I don't want to do this anymore. And I said, okay, buddy, here we go. We're training now for the first time.
Yeah.
And I said, back. He kind of like ran off into like my stoop. I said, back. And I helped him at that point. I kind of like half-heartedly casted him to him. And every time I was saying back, I was applying a little bit of pressure. I'm not talking, like the dog wasn't spinning circles. He's not doing it. He's just getting light collar pressure. He knows what collar pressure means. It's been 2 to 3 months of collar pressure when he does something wrong. And I just say, back. And I kept doing it. And eventually he's like, all I know is that everything but going to this pile is bad.
Yes.
And he goes to the pile. He gets the bumper. The pressure is released.
Yeah,
but
that makes good sense.
But that's when you're actually doing force fetch.
Yeah.
That's when you're doing
that
it.
level.
And so many amateurs don't do that. They're like, my dog, I don't need to force them. My dog is already doing it.
So what you're saying is at some level you need to push the dog to the point where it doesn't want to do it.
Yes, in a very simple concept that they've been doing for weeks now. They understand what they're supposed to do.
Yeah.
And as soon as this is where the art of dog training comes in. You walk up, you run that leg 10 times. And if the dog has already been through like 4 to, I don't know, it could be 10, of times of them trying to run away, escape that whole scenario, and you just lightly correcting them and showing them there's no other way to do this right, but just to do exactly what I say, you will see their brain in that drill once they fully understand it. And they'll be like, their ears will pin back and they'll be like, I don't want to do this, but I have to do this. And the key to being a good dog trainer is seeing when that happens with that dog, doing it 1 or 2 more times and walking away.
For sure.
And then the next time you do it, you just do it 2 or 3 times.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's like across the board, knowing when to quit, knowing when to say, hey, we're good. Let's move on. Let's quit for the day. That's a key to dog training in general. But
the difference is you would stop before they ever lost momentum or they didn't want to do it.
Without that is the key difference.
Right
I'm
there.
not pushing them there. And I think a lot of British style, let's just call it cornerstone style training, fails for people when they push too far. For us, it's like, hey, you should have stopped 3 reps ago.
Yeah.
You had some great success. You pushed the dog to the point of confusion and the dog didn't want to do it anymore, or your dog just didn't have the drive and the momentum wasn't there and you pushed the dog too far, and then you don't have a tool because we're not using compulsion. And we can get into why. It might be a whole separate podcast. We might have to do a third podcast here.
Yeah.
But, hey, for us, it's like, hey, end when the fire is at its hottest.
Yeah.
So
and that's how we train puppies.
For sure.
That's
we just keep that going.
And
all the way
honestly, like 99% of the time, that's what we're trying to do.
Right.
We're always trying to never push them past that point.
Right. But with force of the pile, it makes no sense to not keep pushing.
You have to push there.
Right.
Or you don't know that you've actually built that tool in.
Yeah. Yeah. You would have no way of knowing you have the tool.
Exactly.
For sure. And what is force fetch if you haven't pushed to that part?
Yeah.
To force the
so
pile?
you push to force the pile, you push to force fetch, and then it'll happen intermittently through your other basics programs. When you're doing T, double, if you do double, I don't do double T, but if you're doing T, double T, when you're doing pattern blinds, you're going to get to a point where the dog doesn't want to do it. You force them to do it. You do one leg without having to force them to do it, and you get out of there. Mm-hmm. Because all the dog realizes, I have to do it. I did it right, and nothing happened. And then you note that for the next time you say, I can't do that drill that long.
Yeah. That makes really good sense.
So you still end on the same feeling, sort of the same feeling as you're trying to.
A positive.
You end on a positive.
Right.
But then for the next 3 or 4 times that you're going to do that drill, you better not push it that far.
Right. Yeah.
Because you don't want to get there, but you need a tool when you do end up there unknowingly.
Yeah.
Because it'll happen when you're not ready for it.
For sure. Makes sense. I think it's important just to note, again, the need there of, hey, you have to do it is really not going to come on most hunting retrieves. It's very rare. Mm-hmm. Like I can think of a few. I can think of a time where I had an island in the middle of a flooded cornfield and I had a dog that was really cold and he just wouldn't cast off the island. And I was like, oh man,
what am I going to do?
Force would have been good here,
Yeah.
but that's pretty rare in that scenario. But for the games, for the standards, the breeding standards, and I really do love how you put that. I mean, that is the goal, right? Like at some point, this is why I get the question a lot. Why don't you just have like a Southern Oak line? Like, why are you still importing? because it's super expensive now. The shipping prices are, if I told you the shipping prices, people would fall out of their chairs. It's insane after COVID. And it's very hard. I have to go over there every year and like find dogs that I like. Like I introduced you today to Twig. Last year I went and found her, and from my friend Laura, like I had to buy Laura a bottle of wine to convince her to sell me the dog. It's like, hey, I'm over here looking for this stuff. But the reason is that I want to get as close to the standards as possible that are over there. Right? Like that's the standards I've identified as what I like in a dog. And so I'm like, hey, to have those, I got to find some stuff that's done it. Yeah. Right? I got to find some stuff that's one generation off at most, which is why I don't create just a SOK line of dogs and breed that line over and over and over, because they're not fulfilling. We would have to run hunt tests here, which I don't dislike. They're just not the standards that I think represents what I want in a dog personally. And what I think a lot of my clients want in a dog.
And your clients want hunting dogs?
Almost exclusively. And we do have a lot of clients who run hunt tests. Yeah. It's like an add-on.
Yeah, so what happens is, from what I've seen, like I know of quite a few of them that are in my area.
Yeah.
They start running, they start training, they fall in love with the training aspect of it.
Yep.
They're like, what can I do next? They want to run hunt tests.
Yep.
They start running hunt tests, they enjoy that, and then they make a decision after that.
For sure.
Right.
Shout out to Tom.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's a lot of our people, like a bunch of our people. And some of them will say, hey, we just want you guys to run our dog and hunt tests. So we have that option. Like Corey, Wally, Alex, now Noah, Stone, that Parrish, they're running hunt tests. Miles, I think Miles last year, every dog he had that came through his program, he put a HRCH on the dog for the client.
That's cool.
Which was fun. I think it was only 6 dogs, but it was cool for him, right? He had a great time doing it. Just don't advertise it, because that's not, like, most of our folks are hunting folks. And it's like, hey, we've helped you extend your hobby.
Yeah.
Maybe a little, but like the end all be all is not the hunt test.
Yeah. Good. I mean, that's really good. All right. So one thing that I want to do, counteract what you just said, was I don't need my dog to do that in a hunting scenario. Okay. Could be true. And I wanted to make an important point, is that in the American method, it's not about making them do it. Okay. It's about showing them that they can do something. And sometimes it takes a little bit of force to get them to do it. But if I see that happening in a hunting scenario, I don't think, man, I wish I could force my dog off of that. I don't think that. What I think is, man, I wish I would have trained for that. And they would have just done it.
Sure.
And I think that's a fundamental difference, is that I think that if you take an HRC, not an HRC dog, let's say a qualified all-age dog, and we'll talk about some of the downfalls of field trial bred dogs, because I do want to talk about that, because I think, honestly, that's like, we're setting all this up to have that part of the conversation. But if you take a dog that hasn't hunted before, and you say, watch for birds, they're going to suck at that part.
Sure.
They're going to fail at that part.
Yeah.
But if you say, hey, dead bird,
yeah,
they're going to be like, okay, let's go.
Where is it?
Where is it? Let's do it.
Yeah.
And they'll handle, just like, I find that dogs typically, at least the ones that I've trained, they handle almost no differently on blinds as in a hunting scenario versus a hunt test scenario.
Especially when they haven't hunted a lot.
Especially when they haven't hunted. Yeah, it gets worse as they've hunted more.
Yeah, it gets looser.
But my point is that I'm not looking for an opportunity to force in a hunting scenario. I'm hoping that my training has been so complex and so hard that any hunting scenario is easy.
Yeah, that makes good sense.
And I think that's a fundamental difference.
I think it is. I just think that there are some very important aspects to the hunting environment, expectations, culture that have not been evaluated in the training. That
agree
to me, I'm like, all right, I will sacrifice the casting off the island or the 350-yard cast for a dog that's able to just sit here quietly for a long time.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk. You're bringing up a good point. I think we should transition into the stereotypical pitfalls of each side.
I'm down. And they both have them. I do think, all right, it's 10:35. I'm good on time. It's late here. I do need to pee.
Okay,
so
let's take a pause.
Can we do a Rogan pause?
Is that how he does it?
Yeah, he's like, let's take a pause, and he comes back.
Okay.
However you choose to edit this, I'll accept it.
All right, let's do it.
Cool.
We're going to leave all this in, because it's too funny not to put in.
Yeah, I do have to do it. Oh. Friends, we're back. Pee break. It was inevitable, but we did remember during the break we needed to have a visit from some of our sponsors. Some of Matt, you're not listening to this, but I am sending it to you. And listen, in the previous episodes, this dude, the Hunt Test Hobo, has got your stuff in his truck, cooking with it for dozens of people at these hunt tests.
Oh yeah,
making some recipes that I've heard of that are just phenomenal. And then Clark, I think, was talking about the whiskey collection, and so we've brought out the good stuff in your honor, Clark, for Chris to try. So,
some toast. Here we go.
Toast. Here we are. We're back. All right.
Back to now the difficult part of the cover. Not really difficult, but the more controversial.
Right? Yeah. Let's get into it. I think that. Oh,
that's good.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good. Yeah. Thanks, Clark, for the suggestion. I'll send you an invoice. No, let's get into it. Let's wherever you want to go with it. I'm happy to go.
Okay, so I think we should set a few just reminders of this. Okay, so we're talking about standards and we're talking about goals here.
Mm-hmm.
So everything that we're going to be talking about negative, I don't think is a negative in the dog's cases. Right, it's because those things aren't measured in the same way.
For sure.
So we're going back to your side of it is more reliant on natural abilities. The nose is really important. Not worrying about the distance, which I think plays a lot of it in the way that they handle water.
Mm-hmm.
On my side is these dogs are already doing things that are so difficult. They're going to let a few other things go.
Yeah, there's one more I'll add to that in a minute.
Yep. Go for it. Add it now.
Well, I mean, I think the other thing is the because of force fetch.
Oh yeah.
We have lost the natural mouth.
I remember I was talking to Josh and Keith about this, and they were like skating around the issue, and I was like, "Are you just trying to ask me if I think that American dogs have bad mouths and that we've used force fetch to fix it?" If you're asking that question, the answer is yes.
Yeah.
Now, I will say this. I've trained a lot of dogs that have very good natural mouths.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think buying an American means you're getting a bad mouth.
For sure. And again, it's generalizations.
Yeah.
We've had some, I know of several lines of dogs that have made it over here, of British dogs that were retired early or just known for producing bad mouths.
Yeah.
Just impossible to, because we're not using force fetch, we're using hold conditioning.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you get one that comes over and you're like, well, I just can't get them to hold, or they're just sticky, they won't give it to me. That's a problem too. I think there's always exceptions to the general rule. And
this is one of the places that I'll say, hey, an e-collar fixes a lot of things, not because it's an e-collar, not because there's electricity or anything like that. It's because you can give an immediate correction.
Yeah.
Instantaneous correction.
I would add to that, and I would love to know your thought on this.
Okay.
Because so I'll clear up a misconception. Southern Oak Kennels is not anti-e-collar, and neither is Cornerstone. In fact, I think there's an e-collar module coming. I'll leave that in the podcast for now, but I do know we have a blog on e-collars, and I know that we have a lot of members who use e-collars.
I think you're even selling e-collars now.
We're selling e-collars now. We're not anti-e-collar, and we can get into that at the end. I think it'd be a good way to end it. But I think that where was I going with that? We were talking about, yeah. So my caveat to that is it's an immediate correction. It's not a personal correction. And I do think actually with British dogs, that can come in handy.
I think that's any dog.
No. Okay. Well, I don't know enough about American dogs to say.
The dog has to know that you are applying that correction. If they don't know that you're the one applying that correction, and that you haven't physically applied enough correction that they understand that this is coming from you and should mean the same thing, I think that's what you're saying.
Yeah. Well, opposite for British dogs. So what I mean by that is sometimes...
you're using it as an advantage that it's not personal.
Correct. Because British dogs can get their feelings hurt very easily.
Yeah.
So for us, you have these dogs. It's like, hey, if you're grabbing them by the scruff and hey, listen to me, and they're like, oh my gosh, I've upset him. You got to think you have a century of not a lot of pressure for a lot of trainers.
Yeah, and they don't have collars there, right? It's illegal.
Well, they're illegal. There are some people that use them there, but they're illegal. So not supposed to use them, right? And so you just don't.
My point was that the training method hasn't used them.
Training method in general has not used them or a lot of pressure. And so when you need to apply pressure and it comes from you, it can seem, and I think that and this is a whole different conversation we could have, but the amount of washouts and why dogs wash out is very important. And over there, I think a lot of dogs would wash out because they can't handle any pressure from their handler because they get their feelings hurt.
Oh, so they go the other way than I expected.
Yeah. So then
I expected that they'd be uncontrollable,
No,
and then they get washed out because
I think
of that.
that happens too. Yeah, that happens too. They're too independent. They can't control them.
Because you're bringing up a great point. When we send a dog for a mark in a field trial or a hunt test, we're asking them to go and do it on their own. Same way you are. But I would say our marks are slightly more difficult.
Getting to them is definitely more difficult.
Getting
Finding them is not necessarily more difficult,
Correct.
but getting to them
Getting to them is more difficult.
Yeah.
Which, and honestly, in the American style, that's like all that matters is getting to it
Correct.
the right way.
Yes.
But
That's a great point.
Yeah, okay,
because
go
in the
ahead.
British world, it's all about once you get there, how you find it. They don't care how you get there. Handle them, do what you need, get the dog there, and I want to see how the dog's natural ability is to find it. In the American world, is I want to see how the dog got there.
Yeah, I want to see how the dog got there, and what I think makes American dogs incredible to me, and this is why I like them, is that I can say their name, and it's all on them.
Yeah,
and
go
then
do
I
it,
can
bud.
say the word back, and they know it's a team game.
Yeah.
And it's more extreme than your level of it, I would say, from what I've seen.
Yeah. I think the separation is
It's more greater chasm.
Correct.
what I'd say.
But back to the pressure thing with the collar, we have some dogs. I can think of one right now that was sent from one place to another within my organization, Southern Oak Kennels, because one trainer was not super comfortable with the way the dog was handling pressure and said, hey, I know another guy in our organization that's better at dealing with this, and we're going to deal with it with the collar. And this is a very soft dog. Also a dog who was never really told no. You know, I mean, we get these dogs that are 6, 7, 8
puppy
months.
rearing, man. That's a whole nother
So this one
topic.
was reared in a way that, like, they had Cornerstone, great guy, great family, probably used some treat training. The dog was not given a lot of structure. So when you applied structure, the dog was like, hey, I don't like this. I don't like this at all.
Which can happen on the American side too.
Okay, well, that's good to know.
Yeah.
So this dog is like, hey, I don't like this. And hey, when you get on to me, I just don't want anything to do with you.
And they shut down.
Just shut down.
Yeah.
Right? So then it's like, hey, this is when an e-collar is actually, I think, can be beneficial.
That's totally different than the way we think about it.
Right.
It's very
So-
interesting though.
So for us, it's like, hey, I need a slip lead way out there that the dog doesn't feel like I'm doing it. Like, hey, dude, you have to go. Or you have to stop.
Yeah.
Or you can't break. And so for us, it's almost like a Jekyll and Hyde. Like, I'm going to have the remote in my hand. I'm going to nick you. I'm not going to make a single response. If you break, I'm just going to give a nick, sit. And I'm not going to, no verbal correction, nothing. It's like almost like it didn't come from me. You got corrected because you made a mistake.
Yeah, we're trying not to do it that way. But interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah. Well, some of the British dogs, in my opinion, take it very personally, and the relationship gets damaged from any amount of pressure, and then you're snowballing at that point. If your relationship with a British dog, relationship is everything. And so if you are the guy who just inflicts pressure, again, I think this would go back to, I haven't taught the dog to turn the pressure off, but at the same time, we have dogs who have gone through a century of breeding practices for a standard where they've not been taught to turn pressure off. I think that's important.
Yeah. Interesting. The dogs that I know that have been trained in American methods that are British labs all do fine. But it has to do with how you started them.
How you start, the puppy rearing is incredibly important.
Yeah.
And the way you approach force fetch, which I'd love to get into that, because that is what we just said is a primary reason why when we developed Cornerstone, we decided not to teach force fetch. Is I just don't think every Joe can come off of whatever hobby he's doing, get into dog training, and with the first dog be successful at force fetch.
Yeah.
I think there's a nuance there that has to be learned in person.
I think there's a timing aspect of it. And
From reading a dog.
yeah, and I don't know if I think we could get into this, but there's a British lab that a guy called me and said, hey, I hunt with his son, and he called me and said, hey, I need help with my dog. He sent him to another trainer that is a British breeder, but is doing force fetch. I don't know his name. It's actually a big kennel, because he did tell me, and I was like, oh, really? But the dog completely shuts down. Completely shuts down. And what I realized is when I started working with, I worked with him for like probably 6 weeks now. And every 3 days he comes down, he shows me what I'm doing, and I help him do force fetch and compulsion training. And he said that they stopped when the dog wouldn't pick it up off the ground. And I watched the dog do it. Like I did it to the dog, and the dog completely shuts down and lays down. And most people, an amateur that's done it for the first time, they would stop right there. Mm-hmm. And they would stop. Well, what did the dog learn there?
I can just lay down.
And the pressure goes away.
Yeah, for sure.
So what did I do?
He turned it off.
What did I do? Yeah, he turned off the pressure by laying down. And that's what this guy who's a pro, who has a ton of dogs, did. I'll tell you who it is after. I do remember now.
Yeah.
But it's not,
Let's not say his name.
I won't say
here.
his name here.
Yeah.
I just waited. And I seriously, I didn't have hardly any pressure on this dog. Like you would be like, that's not really that uncomfortable if I did it
for sure.
But I waited, and he eventually picked it up. I did that 3 more times, and the dog was like fixed.
That's it. What was his, all right, what was your response after he picked it up? I'm curious.
Oh my gosh,
all right,
great
perfect.
job.
You're like freaking out. All right, that's good.
Yeah,
that's good.
Nice dog.
Yeah, I love that.
And it's just because the dog would learn to escape the pressure by making noise. He learned to escape pressure by laying down. Mm-hmm. And that's bad dog psychology work.
I agree, and I also think that's probably more prevalent with the British dogs than it is the American dogs.
It happens with Americans. Like I know of 2 dogs that are bred out of.
Oh, that's good to know.
No, I don't think that there's. I don't think that there's that. I mean, you think that there's a difference in pressure, and the ability to turn on and off pressure, or the ability to handle that. I don't think that the simple task of force fetch done by the right trainer makes a single difference between whether it's British or it's American.
I'm glad to hear that. And I hear people say that. I don't do it, so I'm not going to speak to
and
it,
that's
right?
fair. You don't have to say it.
Yeah, but I've had enough people tell me, hey, we took a dog you bred, and we put it through a force program. It did great. But it's always people who are nuanced enough to know how to read a dog. That's my thing. It's like I do think the British dogs, all right, so in the American Labrador world, I'm sure you have a scale of soft and hard, right? Mm-hmm. And so do we.
And I'll be honest, I think we're breeding them too soft right now.
Yeah, you think so?
I think.
Do you think that's like a pendulum swing?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think we went
so.
too far to the one side.
Yeah, so I think so, and I think that the British world really swung harder in the last 10 years. I think people, I can tell you 3 breeders off the top of my head right now that were like, I'm tired of soft dogs, and they started only breeding dogs that weren't soft. And the bottom gets a little tougher. Again, it goes to who you're selling dogs to. Well, the guy who wants a good hunting dog, who's never done force fetch, who wants to train it himself and has no idea the timing of training dogs, he doesn't really need a very hard dog. No. Right? So, anyway.
Okay.
Yeah,
let's talk about extremes here.
Okay.
Everybody, we're talking about extremes of dogs on the scales here. So we just brought up a situation where a very soft British dog can't get through force fetch because perhaps the trainer wasn't as good as they needed to be. Mm-hmm. Okay, I brought up an example of that. I'll say we, as Americans, I don't know who developed the e-collar. I know Rex Carr was either he did it or he, Anyway, if you watch Rex Carr's stuff, his stuff is very similar to what I described about, it's about success, not about just forcing a dog to do it. Mm-hmm. People who didn't know what they were doing has made the bad name for it. But the technology was you fried the dog or you didn't.
The technology's come a long way.
And that was, I'm a big Dogtra fan. That's what I use and everything. Garmin has a good product. Dogtra, if you're listening to, you can reach out to me and we can set up a sponsorship because I've been using your collars stuff.
Right here.
We could have your collars right here.
With the meat church.
I love Dogtra. I think it applies a very consistent response to whatever amount of stimulation or correction I'm trying to apply. A lot of good products out there that do that. That was not the way it was back in the day.
Sure.
It was you fried them or you didn't.
Yeah.
So to teach these complex blinds, you fried them or they didn't do it. So what dogs do you think came out of the program?
Yeah, the hard ones.
The hard charging dogs.
Yeah.
And so what did we breed for a long time? The hard charging dogs. Mm. And then, this is my personal understanding of the history. If you're like a scholar of field trials and hunt tests, and I say this wrong, just forgive me. This is the way I understand it. Is then we started doing hunt test. And what I love about the Grand is it takes a very important thing that I think the field trial game has. Now, don't get me wrong. If a dog is flat out screaming and barking at the line, they're going to get dropped. But it takes a lot to drop a dog for bad line manners at a field trial. Mm-hmm. Now, do I think most trainers realize that a dog that's going crazy can't mark a bird as well as a dog that isn't? Yes. And so now we're applying better practices to make our dogs sit there because we want them to see the birds and be in control. Okay. But that's not the way it used to be. But the hunt test game came along, and specifically the grand. And the grand used to be, and it's still the highest standard of any hunt test, is that the dog made a noise, the dog creeped at all, they were going to be given down, they would be getting ones or marginal on that work.
Yeah.
So I believe that we've started to swing back.
I think so.
To, is this a dog I want to hunt with?
Right.
And what I think is interesting is that the HRC program, the hunting retriever champion, to me doesn't mean it's a dog I want to hunt with.
Right.
It means that it's a dog I mostly want to hunt with.
It's possible.
It's possible.
No, but look, I'm with you there. We have dogs, and I've had to tell this to my guys. I'm like, hey, I am proud of your accomplishment for putting an HRCH on this dog that we imported. I love the dog, not because it has an HRCH, but I'm glad you were able to do this. I also saw 3 dogs today run the same test that I would not own.
Yeah, you would not hunt with.
I would not feed them.
Yeah.
Like I would find a new home for them immediately.
Yeah.
And they still passed.
Yeah.
The evaluation, in my opinion, was just missing some things.
Yeah. And that's honestly, like, if I had any soapbox that I could stand on in this, is that, like, hey, let's hold a higher standard for the seasoned and HRC and hunting retriever champion title, because I think it's human, right, to be like, I want to pass this dog because this guy's put a lot of work into it.
That works and started.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that vocalization doesn't get better with age. So it gets worse. It gets worse. So why are we letting that standard happen and started? I get that we're trying to create people that love the game. I get that. And I'm torn inside between this, but I do think
what you said is important. The standard is what drives the breeding practices.
Yeah. 100%.
And vocalization is genetic.
Yeah.
I mean, you can create it. Don't get me wrong. And look, we have this. I mean, not to name names, there's a very famous dog trainer who was made famous a few weeks ago for a Facebook video who posted a video of one of our dogs that belongs to one of my best friends. And the dog is totally quiet when birds are coming in, but when you send him on a retrieve, he screams his head off the whole way there.
Whole way there? I've only seen it done like where they go, roof, as they leave.
No, this is like a scream. They call it the war cry.
I've never seen that before.
And my buddy loves this. And the first time the dog did it, I was like, hey, we can fix this. And he was like, fix it. I love it. And they encouraged it, and now he does it. All good. He's one of my best friends, and the dog is phenomenal. He's one of the best dogs in the woods I've ever
hilarious.
seen. He's a great dog. Yeah. I'll just say it. The dog's name is Lincoln, belongs to Connor Reddick, hunts at Wild Wings.
That's hilarious.
He calls it Lincoln's war cry. Dude, he has TikTok videos with millions of views. Dude.
I need to watch this.
This is a dog whose mom was imported from Scotland. His dad is an English field trial champion I imported.
Yeah.
So he's as British as they come, and he screams his head off running to the bird. It was taught, right? I trained him. Yeah. He never did it once in training.
So for the sake of the podcast, you're saying that most of the time it's genetic.
That's a rare instance. And he's fine, and like they encourage it, and it's funny. Like it's great. And but most of the time, the rusty swing set when the birds are working, or the screaming your head off when you shoot, that kind of stuff is genetic, I think.
Yeah.
And
I think I mostly agree with that.
When you don't, and if it is genetic, it is not fixable. Mm-hmm. In my opinion,
I will say that you can fix it, but we shouldn't be fixing that one. To me,
yeah, it should.
And the reason I don't think we should be fixing that one, and this is where a standard comes in. Well, I don't think we should be fixing that because I don't think most people who buy dogs, which 80% of a litter goes to an amateur, it's a proven fact, right? 80% goes to an amateur. They don't know how to fix that. You can
even if you tell them.
Yeah, you can control that, but you can't ultimately fix it. So I think that noise is something that we should be breeding out of the American standard.
Without a doubt. And I've talked to, I was just doing a Q&A at the Delta Expo with Chris Aiken. And
what'd he say?
He agreed.
Yeah.
And Brad, we had a lot of people there, and everyone.
Oh, Brad was there? Yeah.
No, no one disagreed, right? Everyone was on the same page. So, yeah, okay, we'll keep going to the extremes, but like in my opinion, that's a deal where it's like, all right, this has come from letting it slide.
Yeah.
And breeding a certain style of dog and saying it's okay. And
that's why I say at the end of this podcast, I'm going to have this little like statement that I think is kind of true. But like, that's the reason I buy almost every dog that I buy is a grand female that's shown to me that they can be quiet. Yeah. To a field trial champion or an NFC that I know is quiet based on calling people and asking them things.
Oh, I like that.
I ask them, all right, does the dog creep? And does it vocalize?
That's some good research.
Because if I know that field trial dog it doesn't do that, but it has every other characteristic that I personally want, which is a dog that can crush a hunt test and run an open field trial. Like that's my ultimate goal of running SRS is to be able to do the work of an open. Mm-hmm. Those are the two questions that I asked.
It's good questions. It's easy for us because if you see the unofficial title, like FTW, we put it on our pedigrees. It means field trial winner. It's like Americans putting
QAA.
QAA. Yeah. Like that's not a real title or jam, right? It's not a real title, but
it means
doesn't
something.
matter.
It means something. It tells you something about the breeding.
Correct. You should know.
Yeah.
This happened, although it's not a recognized title. So FTW, then I know that dog just doesn't make noise. Like it doesn't creep.
Make noise. And there you go. So that is the whole point of pedigrees.
That's it, man. Like
right?
They tell you a lot.
Is that you can look at it and you can make an assumption that they don't have a certain amount of bad characteristics.
Yeah. And you can have a pretty high percentage of confidence in your assumption. Yeah. You could be wrong.
And the breeding could just throw an anomaly.
It happens.
But we're talking about the law of averages here.
And it's the 16th of August. In the last 16 days in the month of August, I've probably had this conversation 25 times where I've told people, hey, I'm not making you any guarantees or promises on these dogs. I'm trying to stack the deck in your favor.
Yeah.
Genetically speaking.
And that's the whole point of all of this. That's the whole point of titles. That's the whole point of anything is that we're stacking the deck in your favor.
Titles and health tests.
Yes, 100%. And I don't think we have any differences on the health test.
You got to have hips, you got to have elbows, you got to have eyes, you got to have DNA.
Yeah. We're all on the same page on that one. So let's talk a little bit about, I don't know if this is wrapping this up or not, but I feel like we've talked about the different types of tests or trials. We've talked about the different ways of training for the reasons that we're training them for those titles. Now let's talk about what is the right fit for a certain person.
This is this is it for me because I'll be totally frank with you. If somebody calls me and they're like, hey, I'm looking for a dog, I hunt a lot, and I really want to run AKC hunt tests. I want to take a dog to the Master National. I'm thinking about running some trials. Then I tell them, you're calling the wrong place. I think we have really great dogs, but I think that you need to call someone who does that and find them. And if someone calls me and says, hey, I have 3 kids, I hunt 45 days a year. Like I'm hunting a lot. My kids hunt. And I might want to run some HRC tests. But I also really want my dog to like be in the office with me at work. I want to ride in the truck, when I'm doing sales calls. And I want him to be trained to be my duck dog, and I hunt flooded rice and flooded timber. Oh yeah, we're your guy. Like I think we 100% can nail that every time. Because you
know what you're trying to produce for people.
Without a doubt. And if you take one of our dogs and you're Blake and you get a Grand Hunt Retriever champion out of Rose, freaking cool. That's awesome. You're an anomaly.
But that's not your goal.
No, it's not our goal. And it's like shocking to us. We're like, oh, you did that at like 2.5, 3 years old, right? Like just that's killer. It's super cool. I'm pumped about it. I'm not going to downplay it. It's unreal.
He used American training.
He used American, and he had American mentors. Yeah, and
that's honestly, I think the dog matters less than the training method does.
I think you're right there. And like her mom is the litter mate
Yeah, so she's already a freak, right?
Yeah, she's already like, oh yeah, they go hard, right?
Yeah,
So my puppy out there is very closely related to that one.
Yep.
But yeah, like when I hear that, I'm never going to downplay it. I'm never going to be like, oh, in fact, we're bringing her in. Like she's going to be part of the fold. We're going to do a couple litters, which we should.
Good. Yeah, you should.
Yeah, for
that's
sure,
amazing.
for sure. And but Blake's cool enough to say, hey, let's do it to English field trial champion. Like let's do that, which is super cool.
Yeah.
One that's been consistently producing easy to train dogs. So I love that stuff, but I'm like, hey, if you saw Blake's dog and you're like, hey, I want a Grand Hunt Retriever Champion too, dickhead, like maybe, but you could probably call Chris Rudd and like I could offer you a route that is much more likely to get you a Grand Hunt Retriever Champion because that is what these dogs have been evaluated for doing.
Yeah.
And that's important to me that we're honest about it.
Yeah. I think that maybe I'll say this. If you're looking for a dog that hunts and does HRC, probably doesn't matter which side of the fence you go with. Mm-hmm. I think if you are thinking about doing higher level stakes and higher level trials and want a dog that is more geared towards being able to accomplish, I'm not going to say more, but more difficult things, you probably want to go with the American lines and know that you want to make sure that you're not getting the extreme of the American lines.
That was my only, my only correction to that would be, hey, if you want a dog that hunts and you want to run mid-level hunt test stuff, sure, you could do both sides of the fence. But I do think you're more likely to get some of the issues we talked about earlier, such as a hard mouth or the noise from the American lines. And I've had some people recently argue with me. They're like, well, we've had loud British dogs. I'm like, I just think you're far more likely to get noise, stickiness, chomping birds from American lines.
I'll say this. If you buy an American dog, I recommend you go through an American program.
I think I understand that completely. I think that if you're unless you really know the training that went behind that dog, right? Mm-hmm. And it was not thoroughly Rex Carr style training. Yeah. Like I think there are some that you're like, oh, that dog was trained in a real simple manner. Like it was. But I do agree. I think you're going to need to be very thorough in that style of training. Yeah. But I do think, you can correct me if you think I'm wrong, but I do think if you go with, let's just call it field trial lines, American field. Well, let me just give you my thoughts on how it works for me.
Go for it.
The calls I get, and this is important. There was an online conversation recently, and some American style trainers got involved, and which was funny because it was about Southern Oak Kennels. And like, I can't imagine hopping on the social media and commenting on breedings from another kennel because I'm never going to do that. Like that's their business. But some guys and girls commented, and it was fine. And like we were talking about, what could happen, what British dogs are like, what American dogs are like, and how, hey, we've had some British dogs that made noise and blah, 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 blah. I just think if you really want to avoid the super high-strung, unable to turn it off, make noise, chomping, then you want to avoid a lot of NFC, AFC lines.
I totally disagree.
Let me hear.
Which is going to surprise you.
Yeah, no, I would love to hear it.
I think that it has to do with your research.
And what the question? I don't think not asking the right questions.
You're not really asking. You have to ask the right questions. Mm-hmm. When I bought Rex, which is out of NFC Fox, who won the 2019 Open, was bred to a grand dog. Okay. I made the right questions. I trusted the breeder. I've bought many dogs from this breeder, and he breeds very compliant, soft dogs and doesn't put up with any of that BS. Mm-hmm. So I knew he had done the research. I had did my research. I had called many people. I probably called 6 to 7 people who had already owned dogs out of that sire.
Yeah.
And I knew that he didn't have the two things that I knew genetically I wasn't going to be able to deal with, that I didn't want to deal with in Chris Rudd's breeding program.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And he is the calmest dog in the house compared to every dog that I have. And my 9-year-old daughter is going to run him, and he is like totally willing to do with it.
I love that.
So I don't think you look at the title and be like, I'm going to associate all those negatives that have been historically a problem. But I think that we've gotten so smart, and honestly in the last 10 years, that we've realized it's not fun to train those dogs. And so
But some people are still training them.
Don't get me wrong. If a dog crushes it, yes. And that's why I say you have to ask the right questions.
The right questions. I do agree with it. I totally agree with that from a research perspective. A lot of people are unwilling to do that, or they just don't know.
I agree with that. 100%.
They just don't know. And this is the call I get. And this is what I was trying to explain on that post with people is, hey, I told you, 4 or 5, sometimes as many as 10 times a week. Really? I'm on a phone conversation with people who are like, hey, this is what I did. I bought a dog from these lines, and it's a high bred American dog. And the rest of the conversation is, I love my dog, but it's driving my family crazy. And they have a dog that's just through the roof on energy. And I'm not saying that some of our dogs haven't been this way, by the way. Let me clarify that.
Yeah,
I had a conversation today with a guy who's dealing with a litter mate of the one that chewed through the gunner out there.
Yeah.
Honey, who he's like, I can't get the dog to settle. Now, some things he said is his fault, right? I was like, hey, you can't.
Most of the time, it's their fault.
Almost always, right?
Yeah.
But I do think you're less likely to get it with some of our breedings compared to some of those other breedings in the American game. However,
because of why? Because the standard
of a measurement is different. It's different, and that's fine. I admit it, and I will say, hey, you didn't get a bad dog. You just got a bad fit. You got a bad fit for what you're doing. You wanted a dog that would hunt with you 12 weekends a year and sleep by your fireplace. And you bought it from 2 dogs who will do a 450-yard mark and a 300-yard swim and take an angleback off a point without questioning it into the wind at 350. That's a different dog. That's a different level of dog. I'm not saying they can't have an off switch. I'm just saying it's not usually evaluated.
I would say the titles don't evaluate it.
You have to do more research.
You have to do more research.
And I can appreciate that because I had this conversation this morning. I talked to my friend Kevin Haynes. Shout out to Kevin in Scotland. We were talking about a dog that we both like. And I had seen the dog go out at a trial. And he had seen the dog not get first at a trial when he probably deserved it. I saw the dog go out. He didn't win the trial. And I left the trial thinking, that's my favorite dog here. That's the nicest dog I saw today. And the standard didn't show it, but I saw it. And I wouldn't have known that if I hadn't been sitting there. Yeah. So there is a level of research beyond the title, okay? I fully agree with you there. Hey, we got to call some people. Most people are unwilling to do that, or they just don't know to do it.
Yeah. And so if you take anything from this podcast, the retriever world is extremely open.
It's very open. It's very there's so much crossover in the standards. There's so much. There are almost as many exceptions to the rule as there are rule followers when it comes to hey, here's what we expect. And I
guarantee you, if you ask any American field trialer, would you rather have a dog that makes a lot of noise at the line, or would you rather have a dog that sits there quietly and marks the birds? What would they say?
Quietly,
without a doubt. So my point is I think in the last 10 years we've gotten tremendously better at it. I think we're getting closer and closer.
I do think that the gap is getting closer. I think that not in necessarily every breeding program, but for sure. Clark was talking to me the other day, and he was like, dude, we were up there at SOK Great Lakes in Michigan.
Okay, yep.
Were you there?
No, I couldn't. I had to go to Europe and film.
Oh, shoot. Work. Who works? So they were there, and Clark was like, dude, Wally ran a test dog with some dog y'alls. And his name's Raymond. He's out of a dog I imported years ago who's been passed away a long time, Apache Joe. Phenomenal international field trial champion. I'm going to add this caveat. We're not going to talk about it. In the UK, they also have working tests. and they are very much more so like a hunt test. And what I mean by that is they'll be like, hey, we're going to shoot this mark. You're going to know the dog off the mark. You're going to run 2 blinds, and then you're going to pick the mark up. And we're going to judge you on points. There's no title awarded. It's like a way to continue getting your dogs in shape and keeping them going until field trial season comes back around. They're not talked about a ton. They do game fairs. I pay major attention to the working tests because
because it applies over here.
100%.
Yeah.
And so the dog I bought, Apache Joe, he's an international field trial champion. He's I don't know if he was second in the Irish championship or third, but multiple times won a lot of working tests. And in the like CLA game fair, the year I bought him, he was top dog. So I'm like, hey, he knows the business. Like he knows how to handle on these scenarios that are important for over here. Anyway, like when we talk about those types of breedings, those types of dogs, there are things that they can do that are a little different than like what some of the British dogs might do. And the standards are a little different. And which dog was I referring to?
Raymond.
Raymond ran the test dog at the SRS.
Mm-hmm. And Clark called you.
Yeah, Clark calls and was like, I'd run that dog in the SRS. He was like, I'd be very happy to stand over that dog in the SRS.
Yeah. And this is what I was telling you. Cooper, the dog that I was talking about that's running qualifiers, or he's not running qualifiers, but he's running qualifying marks, open marks, honestly.
Yeah.
350 yards over really complex water marks.
Your buddy's British dog?
Yeah. We're just changing the way that we do things because we know he's nosy.
Yeah.
He wants to engage his nose earlier than we want him to for an American standard.
Yep.
And we know that he could lack courage.
Yeah, for sure.
So we're being very careful about the way that we build these building blocks, and he's doing incredible. He ran a 300-yard watermark with 3 re-entries.
Yeah.
He didn't do it right the first time.
But you changed. But yeah, you got to change the method sometimes to the madness. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, so I appreciate all that.
So this is the last thing I'll say. We were talking about this in the drive. I think that you should match the training to the way that the dog has learned to some degree. Mm-hmm. And if you're a first-time hunter or a first-time dog owner who hunts a lot and has no interest in running the hunt test game, probably buying a dog from Barton and following the Cornerstone program is a good idea because there's less chances that you're going to make an error in the timing game and the things that it takes to do a dog in the American way. But if it's maybe your second dog or it's your first dog and you like, man, I really think that this like trial game or test game is going to be fun. I've seen other people do it. I have a great mentorship ring around me that I encourage you to buy an American dog that you have called on. You've done the research you need to know. You've asked around. You know that it doesn't have the undesirable traits that the standard does not measure, and you find a good mentor and you follow the American program because I think you're going to have more success in the end.
Yeah. I don't disagree at all. Completely fair. Yeah. There's really no nuance, no caveats to that. It's just when you run into problems is when people don't accept that. Mm-hmm. And they're trying to sell outside of their audience, outside of the right group. Yeah. And I'm over here, I'm looking at all this SOK swag. We have puppy day tomorrow, right? Yeah. And I'm like, hey, I know all my guys fit. All the people coming to get puppies tomorrow, they fit exactly what you just described. And I'm hoping to catch as many as possible of those people that are like, I'm getting into this. Yeah. I'm really trying to catch the guy that's like in his mid-20s. And he's like, I got a new family. I'm a big duck hunter. I'm getting my first nice dog. I don't know what I'm doing. Yeah. I'm like, I gotcha. Yeah. We're going to make this, we're going to make sure this is fun for you.
And that's why I love the fact that you guys have partnered with the Hunt Test Guide and you guys are doing that. Yeah, I believe that we can make a bridge for the people who fall in love with the dog training, not because they train Cornerstone or they have a British lab, but because they love to train their flipping dog.
That's it. And they're like, dude, this is so fun. And I'm like, okay, all right, cool. Check out the Hunt Test Guide because you can take this to a next level. Yeah. And your next dog could be different. You could buy an American dog, or you could say, I'm going to get like I'm going to be
a very courageous British.
I would say, yeah. And the same thing you said, and we have people that call. Same thing in my conversation with Blake about who to breed Rose to. It's like, hey, can we pick one that's got the courage? Can we pick one where we don't see a lot of giving up?
Yeah.
For sure. Probably your chances of success are going to be less in running the Grand than buying a dog that comes from what you're describing, right? I'll admit that all day long.
Yeah, and just so for people know, I'm an aspiring breeder. I've done 1 litter.
Two as of this week.
Hopefully as of this week. You know, we're breeding. That's the whole reason we're down here. We're breeding winter to stroker. And we're hoping that we get a really good litter of puppies that will do a couple things. They will be great hunting dogs because that's important to me. I hunt a lot. I love hunting with Winter. I didn't get to hunt with her last season because she had puppies, and it sucked.
Yeah.
Because the dog doesn't make noise. The dog sits there and watches the birds. She goes and gets the birds, and I have a bond with that yellow dog that will never be replaced.
Sure.
Because I love her. But I believe because of the work that I've done and her breeding that she can play any of these games. She can. I don't know if she'll ever run an open. I have plans to run amateurs in a year or two. I believe she can do it. I've trained with a ton of field trial folks, but I'm trying to breed dogs that I would love to hunt with.
Yeah.
That can play any game and that the amateur, a informed amateur can run.
Sure.
I will tell you, if this is your first time dog, I won't sell you a dog.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate your honesty in that. And I also feel like the dogs we're breeding, I could say, hey, I'm going to pick a few litters this year. And I'm fully confident that if I were to give you Chris Rudd, one of our puppies, from several of our litters, you could take it a long way.
Yeah.
I'm not going to give
and I
like
believe
a
that and what I've seen with British dogs.
For sure. I'm not going to give it like a, hey, you could take it here. But I'm going to say you would not be like, hey, I'm very disappointed in this dog. Right. And I think the gap is closer nowadays than we might like to believe it is. I think there's a lot of daggum overlap, like a ton. And we usually make too much of it. We could get into a whole lot of other aspects of the breeding side of it, like physical build, looks, like those are all.
Man, we don't have time for that.
No, we don't. And like you got, what's the dog's name who's in the kennel right now?
That's Fang.
Yeah, Fang. Like super beautiful dog. Happy as can be. Like I appreciate well-bred dogs. I don't really care.
Yeah. That's a winter stroker puppy.
Perfect. Like repeat it.
That's
awesome.
Clark's dog, and I trained it, and I'm like, I want one of those.
I love it. Hey, Clark, we got your dog here.
Yeah.
We're not going to ruin him here at Southern Oak Kennels. Well, Clark, he's been here several. He smoked his trailer on the tree right over there. Yeah, for sure. Just want to end with this. You've now come to Mississippi. It's August the 16th. What do you think about the weather?
Dude, that weather sucks here. I couldn't believe when I mean, just for those that are listening, I stopped in Effingham, Illinois, which is like 3 to 4 hours south of me. And in the middle of the night, I went, I got in the hotel, I slept, got up and started driving with my air conditioning. I drove straight through to Oxford, Mississippi. I opened my door.
He shut the door and texted Clark and me.
I said, "What the flip is this crap?" It was a wall of heat and humidity.
Yeah.
That I was like, this is like, I used to be a preacher. This has got to be close to what hell's like.
Yeah, the 7 layers.
It's not quite that, but it was bad.
But this was, I think, probably top 2 or 3 hottest days of 2024 when you rolled into town.
Man, that was bad.
But pretty standard for August. I mean, when we get a cool front in August, we're like, oh yeah, it's only going to break 90 by 2 degrees today. We're good. Yeah. So I'm glad you got to experience a little bit of the Mississippi, absolute.
Well, I will say that you are the Northern Mississippi surfer clan. Like that is what your family is. We went on the boat, man, and you got this. I can't even describe to the people listening. Like I used to think Ainley trailers were beautiful. His boat, this new boat that he got today is like just gorgeous and it has all the bells and whistles.
Well,
and it was
you
cool.
got to see the kids do the deal.
Dude, I'll tell you what, man. Like this is like getting really personal, and it's probably people listening. Like if you're listening this long, like you can just ignore this part. But I'm maturing as I get older.
Yeah.
I'm selling my house. I'm starting a new job. I'm going through all these things, and I'm like, I just like hanging out with my kids.
Yeah.
And it's a very different person than Chris Rudd, the goal-oriented person.
Yeah.
Like, I'm maturing. My wife and I were talking about this a lot this week. You know, we're going through a lot with the house sale. You reflect a lot.
For sure.
And seeing your kids having like the grandest time made me like appreciate the fact that I have access. I mean, I don't have the boat that you have, but my dad has a lake house and I hate going up there. But recently in the last couple of months, I'm maturing to where I'm like, I can't wait to go up there so the kids can go tubing.
For sure.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I'm growing up a little bit.
I feel that. I'm proud of you for that. And we have a lot of good conversations in the depths and in the weeds and in the cover when it comes to dogs. With kids, I'm like, hey, this. It's important to me that however we set up our life, Bethany, my wife, and I, the kids take primary importance as far as like my energy, my time. And I love my dogs. I love training dogs. I love evaluating dogs. I love going to Hunt Test. I love going over and watching my boys run HRC. Like I like seeing good dogs, man. I don't care what they're doing. I don't care if it's my buddy trains like protection dogs and does all that. I love watching good dogs. I love dogs. Kids, man, I'm never going to get these years back. Right. So when they're grown and gone, I can keep training dogs, but I'm never going to get my little kids back again. So I'm glad you got to go out with us today. Yeah. I'm super glad you're here at Southern Oak Kennels to record this episode of the Lab and the Hunt Test Hobo, which is super fun to do a collab. I hope people get something out of it. I hope there are people who listen who really are not sure about what's an American, what's a British Lab, and this just piques their curiosity and they keep diving deep.
Yeah. I hope that people are more educated about the different lines so that they can make the right decision for themselves.
Yeah, for sure.
This is America, by the way.
Dude, make the right decision for you. There are enough of us breeding each that you can find a good one.
Yep.
Yeah.
Amen. Preach it.
All right, man.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thanks for having you.